Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we will be looking at the most interesting cards from the latest Japanese sets, Explosive Fighter and Cruel Traitor. Usually I prefer to wait until we get English scans, or at least the full set list. However, this is an exceptional circumstance. Pokemon recently have revealed that Steam Siege, the English counterpart to XY11, will be legal for Worlds. I believe the release date is August the 3rd. Therefore, I believe gathering info on this set as soon as possible may benefit those listeners who will be attending Worlds this year, and hopefully will help guide your playtesting for the future. Before we begin the review, I have a couple of points to tackle. Firstly, I remind you that these scans are translations and not the final wording for our English set, so a couple of cards I'll discuss will have this train of thought in mind. And secondly, this review will not be discussing Karen, and every card that I do discuss today will be analysed under the assumption that Karen is not legal for Worlds. So I may mention that a card is only good when Karen's out, but if it's not in the set, then probably don't play it for Worlds. If, however, in the upcoming weeks that we do get confirmation of Karen in Steam Siege, I'll make a separate video about her anyway, because she's potentially a format shifting card on her own, and basically means that we have to revisit a bunch of decks and their viability once you take Night March out of the equation. But regardless, that's for another day. So, let's jump straight into the set review. Usually it's at this point where I say we'll kick off with the grass types, but XY11 does introduce the dual type mechanic, or reintroduce I should say. So the first card we'll be discussing is SHIFTRY, a grass and dark type stage 2 Pokemon. SHIFTRY has a fairly standard 140 HP for a stage 2, and is equipped with 2 attacks. Devious Wind deals 40 damage for a single grass energy, with the effect: until the end of your opponent's next turn, all Pokemon tools and stadiums have no effect. It's at this moment that I should point out that SHIFTRY is a stage 2 Pokemon, but thanks to Forest of Giant Plants, we are able to get the attack off on the very first turn of the game if we're lucky. I've tried using a Battle Compressor Revitalizer engine with things like Superior from Fates Collide, and I think this could be implemented again in order to access our evolution pieces throughout the game a little bit easier, compressing stuff early. Getting those Nuzleafs and Seedots pretty quickly is a great combination with Compressor Revitalizer, and just recovering these Pokemon throughout the game is also pretty handy. So Devious Wind is actually comparable to Giratina's Chaos Wheel in terms of disruption. We know that many decks are dependent on stadiums in the current format. Think about Trevenant and Night March, they love using Dimension Valley, and then there's Aquabox and Greninja, they play high counts of Rough Seas. Even ironically, against things like Vileplume and Vespiquen, you negate Forest of Giant Plants, so that's pretty cool. And again, we know tools are really good right now. Fighting Fury Belt's used in a bunch of EX decks. Floatstone is an essential resource for a bunch of archetypes. And maybe even combining Devious Wind with a Lysander can trap chunky Pokemon in the active, which is cool. Also, again, against Megas, you shut off Spirit Links, so that can be really frustrating as well. So we do have to remember, though, that Pokemon Ranger is out in this set as well, and it does kind of ruin the disruption element of this card, as well as Giratina, I guess, but it still forces awkward plays from the opponent, so a good start for SHIFTRY. It's piqued the interest, but it's the second attack, Extra Sensory, where we see that SHIFTRY can also hit some better numbers. For 2 colourless energy, we do a base of 60 damage, but can do an additional 40 damage if we have the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, so with careful play and occasional uses of cards like Judge, it's fairly easy to achieve. 100 damage for double colourless energy is an efficient enough attack, albeit a little underwhelming for a stage 2. But let's not forget that we are able to hit for weakness on many popular archetypes thanks to the dual typing that we have. Trevenant Break, Greninja Break and Seismitoad EX would all suffer at the hands of SHIFTRY. One reason my favourite pet deck actually, Vespiquen YVELTAL Zoroark, is seeing a little bit of play here and there is basically because it's taking advantage of its strong typing, grass and dark, and now we have SHIFTRY, which can represent that threat in one neat package, which is pretty cool. But really, getting a bit ahead of myself, it's still a stage 2 Pokemon, so you do have your clunkiness concerns that you can't really get it set up very often. Against the likes of Night March, you're always going to be behind, and yeah, there are those sorts of worries, but I think with the right support, this can take wins against, like I say, some of the popular decks like Trevenant and the water types that are weak to grass as well. So definitely an interesting card, and one I'm going to look forward to trying to build. Next up is a very cool 40 HP basic Pokemon, trying to prove that great things can come in small packages. Foongus's Playball ability allows us to search the discard pile for up to 3 Pokeball cards and put them into the hand when he is played onto the bench. Let's be frank, the Pokeball card itself is a pretty bad one, so with current translations, no one should care about Foongus too much. Unless for some reason you want to flip a lot of coins, which could be the case. Maybe if you have Pokemon that are really difficult to search out in the first place and you can't really afford level balls, just flipping lots of coins could be an option. But this is where I must stress that Japanese scans and Japanese translations are not the English wording. So if, and I know it's a long shot, but I am a believer, if the translations were to mean the broader term, as in Pokemon ball search cards, Foongus could be pretty epic. It could breathe life into expanded rogue decks like Ninetales Amoonguss, thanks to just having more access to stream your attackers and support Pokemon with a spam of level ball. Already, just Foongus fits in the deck already, so it would be perfect. It could even just feature in decks like Reuniclus if you're still feeling like you want to play Rogue. Again, helping out, just recover lots of evolutions as they go down each turn. Greninja could spam lots of dive balls, so Foongus could be a one-of. Again, it's if the translation is like that. Even the new Mega Gardevoir could benefit from this little guy to help flood the board after like discarding a bunch. Because you just put the Foongus down, then you can Ultra Ball into Hooper, which can get you into a whole bunch more Pokemon. So I would really, really love Foongus. It has the potential to be the coolest card we've seen in a while, as long as the wording does enable the broader spectrum of search cards. If not, then Foongus is pretty much a near miss for competitive play, so that would make me pretty sad. Getting back on track, we have some fire types to discuss. More specifically, we have the first break evolution of the set. Firstly, the stage 1, I guess. PYROAR has 120 HP and 2 retreat cost. With an attack for fire colourless, we deal 60, and we're able to search out for a fire energy and attach it to himself, making him, fairly self-sufficient, but not exactly a big deal. The second attack for fire colourless deals 90, and before dealing the damage, we discard all tools attached to the opponent's active. It's a cool option for getting 2-hit KOs on big EXs trying to use Fighting Fury Belts. We can also get around things like Bursting Balloon, which is cool, even frustrate players again trying to Mega Evolve. Like I was saying with Shiftry, shutting off these sorts of tools can be pretty cool. We do already have a couple of previous PYROAR, which are probably a bit more playable, so maybe a split between these is the best way to build around PYROAR if you really want to. The Break Evolution launches PYROAR to 160 HP and provides a lovely 180 damage attack, so for Fire Colourless, Kaiser Tackle is actually pretty awesome. The downside being that we also recoil 50 to ourselves, so we pretty much negate the HP buff we gain from going Mega in the first place, which is quite cool. There is Protection Cube, but no one's really going to play that. Overall, the attack is something PYROAR decks have lacked in the past, to batter through big threats a little more quickly, to wrap up games. But I'm still unconvinced that PYROAR can keep up in the format, with so many decks having answers via Hexmaniac or simply just... There's lots of popular decks that are evolutions right now. Look at Trevenant and Greninja, just to name a couple. So this break is, it could have been a big deal maybe a few sets ago, but he's just a little bit late to the party for PYROAR in my opinion. VOLCANION is the next Pokemon of note. 130 HP basic is a great start, and his attack Power Heater is bonkers in combination with the VOLCANION EX, which I'll come on to shortly. The base damage is only 20 for 1 fire, but it has an awesome effect, allowing us to attach or choose 2 bench Pokemon and attach a fire energy from the discard pile to each of them. Now, for those yet to check out the set yourselves, the EX version of VOLCANION has blatant synergy here, as it allows us to increase our output whilst also discarding fires from the hand, basically fueling the baby evolution then to attach to our Pokemon. So we get great early game acceleration and decent early game damage for just a single energy. So that sounds pretty much like a broken version of Oblivion Wing in terms of damage and excel. So it's probably going to see a lot of play based on the first attack alone. On top of that, we do have Blacksmith as well, so this means that even the second attack for 3 fire energy is usable on the first turn, just to do a vanilla 100 damage. Again, this can be increased with the likes of Fighting Fury Belt, so that we can deal with stuff like Shaymin EXs, but we could even go one step further, combine a few Steam Ups, the ability from the EX, and maybe even a Muscle Band and Bish Bash Bosh. There we go, we're dealing with an EX Pokemon. So this is a really solid starter for the new Fire archetype, and it's a great foundation for this sort of deck. So let's cover the explosive fighter himself, VOLCANION EX on the right there, in a bit more detail now. He's another one of these awesome dual types, so this time it's fire and water, meaning he has access to a lot of support Things like Dive Ball to Blacksmith, everything in between, even Rough Seas to improve the Trevenant matchup is pretty cool. Ironically, it does mean that he has weakness on himself, so Volcanion Wars, just like the old Mewtwo Wars, they could start being a thing, which is pretty cool. The Steam Up ability, as I mentioned earlier, allows us to discard one fire from the hand so that our basic fire Pokemon's attacks deal an additional 30 damage to the opponent's active Pokemon. And bear in mind that this is stackable, so I imagine Hooper EX is going to be Volcanion's new best friend in order to get big attacks off early on in the game, while setting up the board. So, although there are many potential attackers for Volcanion EX, the likes of Entei, Flareon EX, Charizard EX, they've all seen play this season, but Volcanion's own attack, Volcanic Heat, can pack a punch when needed. For 2 fire, 1 colourless, remember we do have Blacksmith, so even on turn 1 we can pull this off. We can deal 130 base damage, and again, we can increase this with Steam Ups, and the only downside is we can't attack next turn, so this is a nice number for dealing with non-EXs, and then if we are scaling it with tools and Steam Ups, we can also one-hit KO some higher HP threats, which is pretty awesome. In a vacuum, these new Volcanions look monstrous, so really just inherently powerful cards. However, their weakness to water is pretty unfortunate because the likes of Greninja and Seismitoad are likely to remain popular. Another flaw is the deck's reliance on abilities to really hit the proper good numbers, so well-timed Hex Maniacs may cause you to fall behind in prize races at times as well. Also, having to often use Blacksmith as your supporter may mean that a heavy item-based draw engine is needed, much like the ones we saw earlier on in the season with Entei Charizard, so the dependence on these items may also be an exploitable weakness for the deck. Another huge issue is, currently at least, there's no real inbuilt means of handling Night March, so the deck needs work in order to keep up, be it something like Bursting Balloon just off the top of my head. I don't really know what this deck needs in order to beat Night March, but because we're having so many EXs that we have to put on the bench just to deal with things like Joltix and Pumpkaboos, it's just not very favourable for us, so I don't really see where it beats Night March. Maybe it's one of these decks that just has to wait until Night March has had its day before becoming a top tier archetype, but there's definitely something here. I guess it's also worth mentioning that Volcanion's dual typing alone, because he's like the only basic Pokemon with dual typing, it may be a blessing for the Rainbow Road deck, which until now has remained on the fringes of competitive play, but it sounds pretty silly that for a single Ultra Ball, you can find a Hooper EX, and then that Hooper, you put him on the bench for that plus 30, and then he can search out 3 more EX Pokemon, but actually it's like 4 different types if Volcanion's one of your 3 EXs that you choose, so basically one Ultra Ball can be a plus 150 damage for the Rainbow Road deck, so that's pretty awesome. So Rainbow Road, again, it's going to be one of these things that you kind of have to wait for Karen until it can start being a deck, but I'm going to give it a go regardless because Hooper for 150 damage sounds pretty sweet. Anyway, let's move on. Next up we have CLAWITZER. He's an interesting water type with frustratingly 100 HP rather than 90, but at least I guess we do have Dive Ball if we really need to search him out. This little guy may serve a nice role as an accelerator for Mega Evolutions with crazy attack costs. Mega Booster allows us to attach 1 special energy from your hand onto one of your Mega Evolutions. This again is stackable just like something like a Bronzong or whatever you want for each CLAWITZER that you have in play. I can see this being most effective with the likes of Mega STEELIX EX or potentially even the Dragon Mega Rayquaza, because these Megas can tank a hit or 2 and then dish out a whole load of damage when ready to roll, and Mega Booster makes it a little bit quicker. Especially for STEELIX, because I foresee this list having like only special energies in the list, so CLAWITZER can have a field day just stacking a bunch of strong energy, shield energy, and DCEs, but I'll get onto that later when I'm talking about STEELIX himself. We do also get a CLAWITZER break, which bumps the HP up to 130, which is fair for a full stage 2 Pokemon, I guess, but it offers just a single attack for 1 colourless energy, lock on, preventing the opponent from retreating their active, as well as increasing the damage from our defending Pokemon by 120 next turn. I'm pretty sure this is terrible, and frankly I won't waste any more time on this because I don't think this is ever going to be worth adding in, especially like CLAWITZER powering up big things like STEELIX and Rayquaza. They're not really going to need help getting this extra buff of damage, so I don't really see any synergy. So it's not like the Bronzong break where you're already playing lots of Bronzong, you have the break because there's synergy. Here there's like no synergy at all, so I don't really see CLAWITZER break seeing any play. So we also get a Chandelure in the next set. It's one of these Pokemon that always seems to get interesting cards. This time He's 130 HP Psychic type with Spooky Choice, which is essentially Acrobike in an ability, so that's pretty cool for remaining consistent. And even synergizes with his attack, actually. Deadstock for a Psychic and Colorless Energy, or just one Psychic and D-Valley, of course, because he is a Psychic type. We get to deal 10 damage, with the addition of 10 for each supporter in your own discard pile. The new Litwick does have an attack called Small Roast, to maybe help increase this damage early on. And we also have Battle Compressor, of course, so there's obvious synergy there. It's almost like a Vespiquen, but for just supporters instead. It does mean that we probably have to play like a ridiculous amount of supporters in the deck in order to do anything meaningful, but it's also a pretty cool concept. Like having like 25 or so supporters in the deck, it sounds clunky, but at the same time, like we can have plenty of luxury supporters in high counts, so other decks don't really have the space for these things, but Chandelure sort of has to have these things, so having tons of like Lysanders for Trevenant, maybe high Hexmaniac count for Greninja, even old favourites like N and Judge can be used because we have the ability Spooky Choice anyway as a backup to like draw into good hands again. I think there's something here. It's one that I want to try out. I feel like it's one of these that could go under the radar for a bit, but I guess at the end of the day it's still a stage 2, so it's unlikely we'll ever see it on the top tables. Oh, and by the way, if you're thinking of putting one Litwick, one Chandelure into Night March, just don't. It won't work. Move on with your lives. Night March is fine without these cards, so don't even think about it, guys. But yeah, it's a cool one. TOXICROAK is up next. He's a 90 HP fighting type, so already I have Karina, Focus Sash, and Strong Energy in mind. You should always have these things in mind when looking at fighting types. Again, it's the ability which gets me thinking. Poisonous Enzyme states, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this Pokemon can't be affected by damage from attacks. We have Ariados in order to poison every turn, which could be a cool option, but it's annoying that we can't use Focus Sash in combination unless we use something like Full Heal or potentially something like the new Weavile to exchange tools. So we Ariados poison when we have a Sparkling Robe attached, then we use Weavile to switch it to a Focus Sash, I guess. That could be cool, but at the same time it's like lots of stage 1 Pokemon, so never really works too well. From there, we can just poke with Poison Jab. That's TOXICROAK's attack for just a fighting colorless to deal 50 each turn. There's the coin flip of doing poison yourself, so I guess Trick Coin could even be a potential tool that you want to play in this deck. But I don't really think it's too strong. This is clearly a soft lock because there's so many ways around this ability, like just a Hexmaniac, Pokemon Center Lady, a Switch, Escape Rope, AZ, stand-in from Zoroark, just being a grass type because Ariados can't poison them. I guess just there's so many things, but it's still an annoying Pokemon to handle, I guess. It may even become something like the new age of Mienshao, where the aim is simply to deny prizes every turn, just by getting through 1 or 2. That's probably quite easy with like your Lysanders, your Hexes, whatever, but getting through 6 TOXICROAK, even with some with like Focus Sash if you're able, that could be a real pain for some decks, so it's something that I may toy with in the future. It might be better in Expanded, just because we have Hypnotoxic Laser, which is already like a bonkers card, and then we also have Verbank to do a bit more damage. It means that you don't have to play Ariados, it means you can just stick with a pure line of the Croagunk and TOXICROAK, which could be a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to build, so maybe that's something that I want to look into, but it's always going to get destroyed by the likes of Greninja, anything with bats, Trevenant, but it's something that could be fun, I guess. There's definitely something here. On to the first Mega Evolution of the set, we have Big Daddy STEELIX EX. Now, the regular STEELIX is a complete joke, and thanks to its absurd attack cost, I doubt anyone will ever use them. Read them in your own time if you wish, but I would be surprised if anyone ever announced Iron Tail in tournament play. I just don't see it ever happening. So jumping straight to the Mega, we have Canyon Axe. We do 160 base damage, and 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's pretty cool, but again, the attack cost, just like its predecessor, is pretty ludicrous. A whopping 5 total energy. One of them has to be a metal. In spite of this, there are plenty of ways to mitigate the attack cost, I guess. Especially because, again, this is one of these dual-type Pokemon. STEELIX is metal and fighting, so we can use Carbon Break, potentially. We can even use Bronzong, Mega Turbo, and it's actually CLAWITZER, which is my favourite. Like I was saying earlier, there could be great synergy here, where you have a deck with 4 double colourless energy, 4 shield energy, and 4 strong energy. It sounds pretty epic, as that's your only energy in the entire deck, and with a couple of CLAWITZER, we can set up this guy pretty quickly, actually. STEELIX already has a mammoth 240 HP, So throwing shield energy into the mix, maybe even reverse Valley, and some healing cards, we could stand up to anything, and other than, I guess, fire types, I guess, because of its weakness. But he's never going to be the best deck in format, but I think it's worth testing, because it can be pretty much an oversized thorn in the paw of lots of decks. Just with one strong, you're one-hit KOing EXs. The more strong energy you slap on, the more you can do. You can even use things like Giovanni if you want to deal with other megas. I know right now it's not that good just because Night March can get through it quite quickly, but 240, it means you can probably tank a hit at least once. You have shield energy as well, so it's pretty much impossible for them. You're like a Whale Lord. And if you can take like 4 prizes just by Lysandering a couple of turns, you could actually be well in the race as long as you can recover another STEELIX. But overall, I don't think it's going to be the greatest deck, but definitely one I want to try out. Like I say, the CLAWITZER is a pretty cool option for the deck, so it's one that I'm going to test. COBALION is another interesting metal type Pokemon, this time a basic with 120 HP. A card that I can actually see slotting into metal decks as a cheeky one-off here or there for a big late game burst of damage. For 2 metal energy, Revenge Blast deals 30, plus 30 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. This is a concept similar to an old Shaymin EX, which didn't see too much overall play in its time. However, I'm a bit more hopeful in this case, because we do have Ninja Boy in order to add the element of surprise to close out a game a little bit out of nowhere. And obviously COBALION's a far better lead Pokemon in general than Shaymin EX ever was, because, well, firstly he's a non-EX, and secondly he actually has the first attack that you can fall back on a little bit. Fast Guard prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basic Pokemon, so it's a nice utility option if you happen to lead with him against the likes of Night March, but the attack isn't all that potent anymore because we do have Pokemon Ranger, but also just Lysandering around him is pretty easy anyway, so not the best attack, but it can at least force things from the opponent in the opening turns if you lead with him, so yeah, pretty cool card that I can see being splashed into metal decks. On to some fairy types, we have KLEFKI, which reintroduces the cool concept we've seen on previous Unknowns of the past. Once during a turn, if KLEFKI is on your bench, we may attach this to one of our Pokemon. As long as it's attached, prevent all damage done to that Pokemon by attacks of your opponent's Mega Evolutions, and at the end of your opponent's next turn, discard this card. So it's got the Bursting Balloon type thing where it just stays for a turn, but Megas aren't that dominant in the format anyway right now. It's a good card to keep in mind though, if they do start running rampant. In the current format, I don't see any deck really having need for this card. Maybe splash into Vespiquen builds simply because they have the luxury to have the option, but dump it if they don't need it with stuff like Battle Compressor. So keep it in mind just in case Megas get too strong, but right now they're really not. So on to the next Break Evolution, we have XERNEAS. Before that, a quick shout out to the Geomancy XERNEAS because we get a nice little reprint of it that you can see on the screen there. And it actually sets up the break quite nicely because it sort of feeds into the break. The main attack, Lifestream, seems to benefit from just having lots of energy in play. For 2 energy, we deal 20 times the number of energy attached to all of your Pokemon. As earlier mentioned, Geomancy is a great start, but on top of this, we could use stuff like Max Elixir, even Regirock with EXP share. Thanks to Ninja Boy, this can be a nice combo we can use in a few decks. I'll discuss it a little bit more later on. The main idea is just so that we keep as much energy in play as possible. Obviously EXP share does that. It can't be removed because of barrier that Regirock has, and they can't be Lysandered up, so pretty good stuff. Potentially even Togetic, or Togekiss I should say, could get a look in here. Thanks to the De-Evolution Spray reprint from Fates Collide, we could spam this ability to get a boatload of energy into play and then really just go nuts with XERNEAS Break for big damage. We also get a buff of 20 HP as well, which is kind of cool, I guess. Again, it seems like one of these things that Night March will just annihilate it right now. You'd never really get set up and keep up in the race ever, but there's definitely potential for when Night March does pave the way, if it ever does, that is. Onto the colourless types, and there is just one worth mentioning. Oh, I'm sorry about this thing. The chart's pasted in a bit weirdly. But anyway, this is a cool card with a cool mechanic. Talonflame is a stage 2 with 130 HP and free retreat. With the fascinating ability Gale Wings. At the start of the game, you may put this Pokemon face down as your active Pokemon, so despite it being a stage 2, you can play him as if he's a basic, but only if he's in your opening hand. So pretty cool. I've put a link to an interesting article which includes the probabilities about your starting hand, so you can see the chart there. It's pasted a bit weirdly, but I do implore you to go and watch that. It's just a good article to help evaluate this card in particular, but also just knowing probabilities for your starting hand in general is a good thing. It's a policy I like to keep track of every now and again. So if we take the gamble to play this card in the first place, let's see the big payoff. What do we gain from taking the chance to play this? So Aero Blitz for 1 colorless energy deals 40 damage, and we get to search the deck for any 2 cards and put them into the hand. Essentially, it's using teammates on the first turn as the attack, so it's pretty cool, but I'm still skeptical because there's a heavy use of N and Judge in the format, so at that point, you're basically telling your opponent, end me now, straight away, as soon as you use the attack. So quite often, it's just one energy for 40, so it's not really different from something like a Baby YVELTAL or even Baby Landorus. In fact, it's arguably worse because you don't even get the instant attachments from the bench. So really, for that reason, I don't foresee Talonflame being a big part of the format, because whenever we don't lead the card, it's dead for the rest of the game, and even when we do, the payoff isn't really big enough to justify using him. There is potential for Vespiquen to profit from this card just as a nice opener, and again, we can just Battle Compressor away if we have the excess pieces, and even if we don't lead it, we can get rid of all 4 just straight away. Personally, I don't think it's all that good. So what about trying to guarantee this as your lead Pokemon? As in playing like 4 Talonflame, 1 other basic Pokemon, just because the rules state that you have to have 1 basic in your deck. But from there, just having Maxi and Archie targets, something like Primal Groudon could be good in here. Just have those Talonflames, use those Aero Blitzes, try and force your opponent to shuffle in your hand. Otherwise, you can get big setups, you can get lots of Mega Turbos or whatever else. Maybe you miss the Maxi turn 1, you can get into cards that will guarantee it for the following turn. So pretty cool, but again, we've sort of tried a Groudon deck without any lower stages, or just 1 Groudon and the rest are primals, relying on this Maxi, but it's never really that good for you, because if you don't get the Maxi, then you pretty much just lose the game, especially with Talonflame, because you can't bench the other Talonflame, so you bench yourself quite quickly. So I don't think it's ever going to be that good, and I'm pretty much, with all the item lock turn 1, if you start the Talonflame, you can't really get into the Maxi anyway, so you're just left fighting with a lone Talonflame in that game. So I'd be kind of worried if I came up against Trevenant or even Toad to some extent, so I don't really like the use of Talonflame in those sorts of decks. Moving into Cruel Traitor now, we have, starting again with the grass types, we have YANMEGA, 110 HP stage 1 grass type with free retreat, so already a really strong start. Again, I remind you that Forest of Giant Plants is available to sort of cheat him into play as soon as possible, so for those of you who have been playing for a number of years, you may find this YANMEGA familiar. It feels a lot like a throwback to the very successful Prime version that we got from Heart Gold Soul Silver Triumphant. So Sonic Vision is the ability which states if your hand has 4 cards in it, this Pokemon's attacks cost 0. That means that we can basically ignore Sonic, Assault Boom's 3 colorless attack cost, because we're only ever going to attack with YANMEGA if it's for free, really. So we deal 50 base with the addition of 70 if your opponent's active Pokemon has any tool attached. Now you have to admit that for free, potentially doing 120 is pretty epic, especially as this could be done on turn 1. Grass typing is a blessing not just for the fast evolution, but also, like I was saying with Shiftry, it's good for challenging popular decks like Greninja and Seismitoad. It's just a little bit frustrating that both the attack and the ability can be played around. So if they Hex Maniac you, you may not be attacking for a turn, or if they just choose not to play down tools, you're doing a lot less damage. Obviously against EXs we do have Headringer to sort of balance that out, but there's quite a few non-EX decks right now, and Assault Boom's not doing too much unless we're hitting for weakness. So I don't believe YANMEGA can ever really be the center stage, the main attacker, but we may well find its way as a supplementary sort of thing, just every now and then, because he has this nice free retreat, go into him, get that burst of damage while we're sort of stacking up other attackers on the bench that maybe cost a little bit more. We also do have the Break Evolution. In my books, it's a bit of a disappointment. The attack, it's again for 3 colorless, but we do still have the ability Sonic Vision, so for free, we can do 100 damage, but I really don't think it warrants play, because the text states that it's unaffected by weakness or resistance, so if we're really using YANMEGA, we're trying to take advantage of this typing, so we want to be able to hit weakness on popular things, so just the base of 100 isn't all that great. The jump to 140 HP may tempt you to play 1 or 2 of these, and it makes a lot of sense if you're already playing stuff like Revitalizer. Maybe a combination of YANMEGA and Vespiquen could be an option, so you're sort of saving yourself double colorless energies, while you use YANMEGA in certain terms. Both of them have free retreat, so you have a lot of freedom, and by using 1 or 2 Revitalizer you can get back the break multiple times, so that feels kind of cool. But overall I don't think you're going to play this card just for the break. You're playing it for the lower stage of YANMEGA and throwing 1 break in if you wish. But there we go. I think it's a little bit underpowered, even with things like Judge to get that easy 4-card hand size and stuff like Unknown, even Octillery, they could help balance it out so that you go down to the low hand size and then draw back up or whatever you need to do. I don't think it's going to be all that consistent. So yeah, that's just what I think about YANMEGA. It was great the first time around, but I think the format's just a little bit too quick. And of course we have Hex Maniac to just stop you on certain turns. Next up we have AMPHAROS, a cheeky stage 2 lightning type with 140 HP, with the ability Shocking Light. Once during your turn, we can place 3 counters on an opponent's EX Pokemon. As good as the ability is, I don't see any deck that could really benefit from this, or that has the space to play a stage 2 line just as a bench sitter. It's been a while since the format has been slow enough to play support Pokemon stage 2s. Even stuff like the Crobat lines, they've been dropping in play a lot recently. And they're far more flexible than AMPHAROS. They can deal with non-EXs as well. That's part of the reason why they're so good. This does, however, stack at least, so in theory, if you manage to set up 2 AMPHAROS, it's like having a giant Water Shuriken every turn for free, even though it's just for EX Pokemon, but that sounds pretty strong. I want to see people get creative with this, but so far, I'm not really seeing straight away, nothing clicks in my head that's like, wow, AMPHAROS would be insane in here. It's going to be one of these things where you need to find the right partner for AMPHAROS to get it working. Next up, we are moving on to WEAVILE. It's a 90 HP Dark-type Stage 1 Pokemon that offers a nice ability called Rip-Off, which is actually identical to Masquerain's Tool Reversal ability from Plasma Blast, for those who remember. The photo's on screen as well. WEAVILE could be a great option for Mega decks. They always are plagued with having to use Spirit Links, and then they can't attach whatever else they need, even though certain decks could really, like, certain Mega Evolutions could really benefit from this, so even attaching a Spirit Link in the early turns to something that isn't your lower form of the Mega, then you can rip off, attach it to the right target and Mega Evolve up, which is pretty cool. But I guess at the same time we do also have Ninja Boy to sort of do that thing for us anyway. That's not a stage 1 Pokemon, it's kind of easier to find as just a supporter. Also there's these sorts of high retreat cost decks where you need to keep moving Floatstones around. That could be useful for you, but again, if you're playing a stage 1 line to do this anyway, it probably should just be Zoroark because he offers a good attack as well. So nothing really fits for WEAVILE currently in my head, but I'm sure there'll be a point in the format where this card will be playable, so just keep it in the binder for now at the very least. Masquerain ended up fitting into lots of different decks just randomly. Even stuff like Virizion Genesect started playing it here or there, so that you get heavy use of Muscle Band and reuse G-Booster if need be. So WEAVILE will find its home at some point. It's a very, very good ability with a lot of potential down the line. On to another stage 1. This time it's BISHARP. He's one of these dual types. It's Dark Metal this time with 100 HP. His attack, Retaliate, is the reason to consider him. For a single energy, we deal 30, and then we add an additional 60 if we had a Pokemon knocked out by our opponent's attacks last turn. So it's one of these revenge attacks that we've seen a lot, and normally we see it on basic Pokemon. At least these are the ones that see the most play, because they're a little bit more easy to splash. Things like HYDREIGON, just for a DCE doing that 90. So why should we really consider BISHARP? Because he's a stage 1. It's harder to get this guy going. Your opponent can predict when he's coming out into play. So really the only consideration is that he has dual typing. And I really think this can be underestimated. Dual typing is so huge. Think of things like XERNEAS Break, Rainbow Road, Mega Gardevoir. These should be pretty scared of BISHARP just because he's part metal, as well as things that are also Dark Weak like Trevenant. So we actually take on a large portion of the format just in one card, so that's pretty cool. Also, you have to think that Trevenant, because they're doing a lot of spread damage a lot, you're not actually getting the effect of Retaliate that much, so despite being a Dark type, you're not doing too much. I would have liked to have seen a nicer split of the Retaliate, like a 50 plus 40 would be good, because then you're actually doing meaningful numbers beforehand, but I guess that's just the way the card works, which is a bit of a shame. So it's probably going to be one of these cards that looks cool, but people never actually make space for him, so at least he looks cool. A shiny BISHARP is pretty sweet. It's a blue Power Ranger, so I'm going to pick a couple up just because of the artwork, I guess. Just like in Explosive Fighter with XERNEAS, we also get Baby YVELTAL reprint from Cruel Traitor, as well as a new Break evolution. The Break has 150 HP and a single attack. Knight of Disaster for 3 Dark Energy deals 120 damage and 30 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already has damage counters on it. Now this may ring some alarm bells because it's very similar to Mega Gallade's attack, and as you all know, that saw almost no play whatsoever. But I'm a little bit more optimistic for YVELTAL Break because of a few things. Firstly, the Baby YVELTAL and the Fright Knight are both super playable cards. They are just really good cards on their own. And secondly, it's way more simple just to Break Evolve than it is to Mega. You don't need to get the Spirit Link going, and you don't have to like waste your turn if you can't find the Spirit Link, so you can just casually get into the Break when you need to. I don't think we're necessarily going to build decks around this card. Like we saw, it never really worked for Gallade, so I don't think it's worth having all these Fortress or Bats or whatever you want. But I can see it sneaking into Dark decks as a single copy, because its numbers do seem okay in combination with Fright Knight to handle EXs, and even Oblivion Wing if you're using stuff like Muscle Bands, you can do the initial 50 and then Knight of Disaster to do the 120 to finish them off or whatever, so looks kind of cool. We could just see in general more traditional YVELTAL decks becoming more popular once again, looking forward to Worlds, because using stuff like Max Elixir and Oblivion Wing can get a lot of energy into play, and the likes of Ninja Boy to switch up your attacker could be really cool at times. I think it's a nice combo I want to try out. Again, it's one of these decks where I want to try the Regirock EXP share combo for the late game Ninja Boy, getting into a big YVELTAL EX to swing and just finish out game. Sounds like a bit of a wombo combo in my opinion, so yeah, it's one of these cards that I really want to try out, and I have hopes for YVELTAL Break. It's going to be one of these cards where they're not always going to be featured in YVELTAL decks, but every now and again you'll go like, oh cool, that list is playing YVELTAL Break. Nice. So it's going to be one of those cards where you just sort of turn your head like, oh, he's actually playing that? Sweet. But you don't really expect it in these YVELTAL decks. So MAGEARNA EX is an interesting EX with a subpar 160 HP, but a nice ability, Mystic Heart. It reads, prevent all effects of your opponent's attacks except damage done to each of your Pokemon that has any metal energy attached to it. So this is comparable to the Metal Fortress Bronzong in terms of combating the ever popular Trevenant decks and also playing around Shadow Stitching. As long as we have an energy on MAGEARNA EX and whatever Bronzongs that we wish to use Metal Links with, that would be the way around it. So although I believe it's an inferior ability to Metal Fortress itself, I think this may still be the better option because it's so much easier to search out against things like Trevenant. Especially with Skyfield being utilised, Hooper is more obvious in these sorts of metal decks, so you can just Hooper into MAGEARNA, and then it's sat there. It's way less vulnerable to Lysander Stall, and it's even an okay attacker, I guess. Soul Blaster for a metal and 2 colourless deals 120, and during your next turn it deals just 60. Not exactly an attack to spam throughout the game, but it's an okay option for dealing with things like Shaymin EXs if you're really in a pinch or just trying to close out the game. So I think it's an okay one-off that you can splash into these decks. Again, it's one of these things where you've got to play around. Is it better than the Bronzong? Is it not? Definitely the more searchable of the two. So against Trev, where you have sort of like a 1 or 2 turn window to find the Metal Fortress Bronzong before your Bronzors themselves get knocked out just by things like Silent Fear. Here, as soon as we find MAGEARNA, we can protect things every turn with manual attachments or with other Metal Linkses if we've got them into play. So I feel like this might be the superior option. Definitely the better option against Trevenant. I think it's by far the worst option against Bronzong because it means that we have to commit attachments to itself and other Bronzongs to keep getting Metal Links. So you're getting acceleration, but you're having to attach in awkward places in the first place. So you'd probably rather Metal Fortress in that regard, but definitely against Trev, I think MAGEARNA EX may be the best choice for us. So it's time for the next Mega in the set, my Bay Mega Gardevoir EX. I'm a little bit excited about this card. I think it could be a very popular deck once Karen comes into the format. Wink wink, nudge nudge, please be pre-Worlds. The regular EX is 170 HP and 2 attacks. Link Blast for a Fairy Colourless deals 30 and 70 more damage if this Pokemon has the same number of energy attached to it as your opponent's active Pokemon. It's one of these well-costed attacks which your opponent may be forced to play around. It's been on things like, we know things like Sceptile that do a small chunk and then a bit more if they're poisoned. We know that Manectric EX does 60 and 60 more if they have a tool attached, so Link Blast is like one of these that your opponent may have to play around, which is cool. Not much more than that though. The second attack, Blade of Light, for 2 fairy and a colourless, deals 120 and forces a discard from Gardevoir, so it does have to compete with the Primal Clash Gardevoir EX that you can see on the screen as well. So maybe a split between the two is the best approach, because the newer one's a bit more aggressive, but I do like Life Leap as just a way of dealing with Trev in some sort of capacity, and also Shining Winds good against the popular metal decks, so I actually think I prefer the older one, but the newer one is a slightly more aggressive. The Mega Gardevoir is where we should be a little bit more hopeful. Being a Psychic Fairy dual type offers a few cool cards, including Dimension Valley, but I think we have to utilize Skyfield in this deck just to hit the right numbers. Despair Ray is not only an awesome sounding attack, but it's also, I think, quite powerful. The base damage is 110, which is already a good start, and it's also just one of these numbers that we keep seeing on Mega Evolutions for some reason. But we can actually scale this up. It does 10 more damage for each Pokemon we discard from our bench. This mechanic is really cool actually. It allows us to play multiple Hooper and Shaman EX to get very consistent starts in the game and really get into our Mega Evolution pieces quite easily without having the sort of late game drawback of having easy bench prizes and Lysander stall targets that we all know Hooper and Shaman are always those sort of Achilles heels that we know that Mega decks have. So it's really awesome to get the full benefit and then just throw them away when we don't need them, but at the same time getting an extra benefit because we're doing more damage. At the same time, we can also use the new cards like HAWLUCHA and potentially even FOONGUS if it's good. I throw it in there in the slide just in case it will be good. I really hope it is. We can get these sort of one-time use type abilities and then just discard them afterwards, so we get that gusting effect and then discard them, and then recycle it with cards like Sacred Ash, Super Rod, and again, one of these cards, Karen, would be amazing for this deck, so when we get Karen, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a good archetype, and then all we need to do is draw back into these Ball Search cards, and hopefully FOONGUS can do that for us, and then do more damage all over again. The card's got okay HP, just a strong attack that's again an efficient cost. We have things like Mega Turbo to make it quite easy to get the Fairy colourless energy cost. And just by taking off these targets from the board, I think it's just really awesome. They have to go through the Gardevoir because we force them into no other option basically. Currently, just Night March stomps the deck, and also that weakness to Metal is kind of awkward because Genesect Bronzong, since Italy, is starting to find its feet in the format. And even if anyone wants to play Mega STEELIX, that could also be an issue. So never going to be plain sailing for Mega Gardevoir, but I am a fan of its attack. And again, have to remind you that dual typing can never be underestimated when tackling multiple weaknesses. It's just such an inherently strong thing in the card game right now because everything has ×2 weakness. It's just absurd that you can deal with certain archetypes just on typing alone. It's just such a strong thing to have. So having double the amount of things that you could deal with is just perfect for you. We do have a HYDREIGON that I only mention in preparation for you, for that one moment where you realise that you've pulled a break evolution only to be sorely disappointed that you find out that it's unfortunately HYDREIGON. I think it's fine to pretty much breeze past this card because it's essentially a stage 3 with a 4 energy attack cost, so Collector's Pause now, but I'm not spending any more time on this slide. Sorry, HYDREIGON. We then have the final Pokemon I want to mention. I've actually talked about it a little bit with the Mega Gardevoir, but it's HAWLUCHA. It's an 80 HP normal type with the ability Sudden Cyclone, which, as the name suggests, it gusts the opponent's active Pokemon and forces the opponent to switch. So think of it as like a searchable version of Escape Rope that's just one-sided for the opponent. Or for all of you veterans out there, it's pretty much Cyclone energy. It's a nice card effect that I can actually see being utilised in a couple of decks. Like I said, Mega Gardevoir can use it so that you just don't have to discard like 7 Pokemon every turn. You can just deal with lower HP things and keep up with the prize race, which is pretty cool. Also, decks like Vespiquen could use this card so that you have a better Trevenant matchup. You just gust Trev out of the active in the early turns. Really nice thing to do. So it's like having extra Lysanders in those sorts of situations. Even if you're moving them into a new Trevenant, just because they don't have energy on, you can sometimes buy yourself turns. So great in the early turns to get into their Shamans or their Phantoms instead of Trev, so you can actually use your items and get set up. But even later on, you just force them into awkward spots. So I feel like it can definitely fit into Vespiquen. whilst also just fuel for the discard pile if you don't need it in the matchup. Or even stuff like Parallel City. I feel like that's a stadium that could be popping into the deck a bit more now with these sorts of cards. In general, just forcing EX Pokemon into the active is pretty handy if your opponent's attempting to use non-EXs to just ruin your prize trade. So having that searchable Gust, I think it's so important that it's a searchable card, especially because it's levelable searchable. It's a really cool addition to the format, which could have an impact instantly in a couple of decks, as well as continuing to see play in other archetypes here or there, pretty much throughout its career. I think the only downside is it doesn't have free retreat. Other than that, this card is just really, really big. I think it's one that everyone has to pick up because every now and then he'll just be slotted into a deck and just fit the role perfectly of just gusting things out. It's just really fantastic for you. On to the items now, and despite us having very few trainers and supporters from the set, I feel a couple of these will have a huge impact on the way we construct future deck lists. First off, we have lots of STEELIX. I didn't think to make a slide because we all know I always make a slide normally, but not this time. I was just too lazy. This video is long enough already, so we'll jump straight to Captivating Pokepuff. I know this actually is not in the main set for Japan, but it is a promo. And the reason I do still want to analyze it is because we're getting it confirmed in Steam Siege. We've already got the English scan that you can see there. So it's something we need to keep an eye on for Worlds. Pokepuff reads, your opponent reveals his or her hand. Put any number of basic Pokemon you find onto your opponent's bench. So this is a fairly unique mechanic, and it really is an intriguing item. Pokepuff could be used in heavy disruption decks, attempting to force Shaman EXs and Hoopers onto the bench before your opponent gets the value from them. And then even imagine in Expanded where you can Pokepuff just to scour their hand and potentially catch a Hooper or a Shaman, which could be great. And then if you think their hand is worth it, you can get system as well. So that's a pretty scary turn one, and it makes Expanded even more important to go first, which is maybe a scary concept. It could also be a wonderful one-of in Night March decks, just like having Target Whistle, where you're attempting to get EXs into play, which pretty much means that if you're playing Target Whistle and Pokepuff, the only safe place for EXs for your opponent is their deck. So that's not very cool. There's also hope for the Rogue Lucario deck from Fates Collide. I know when we first saw Pokepuff, a few people were like, woo, Lucario gets good now, and it's true, Fight Alone can hit some absurd numbers at times, and this is a great enabler for the deck, and might make it see play? Who knows? I still think it's inconsistent, but it's definitely a means that your opponent can't play around Fight Alone anymore, so once we do get rolling, it's going to do big numbers. In general, just simply being able to scout the opponent's hand is such a huge concept. In an item, it's great, because then you can decide whether or not to end your opponent, if you want to judge them, whatever else. You can make these informed decisions just because Captivating Pokepuff does reveal their hand. And again, at the same time, if you're going for an N, you Pokepuff, you get a Shaman EX, you put it on their bench, and they can't get the effect from it. So the N pretty much becomes more powerful because they don't have the extra out of Shaman EX. So really, really good stuff. I'm a huge fan of Pokepuff, and I think it's one of these cards where if you have enough space for it, it's one of these things that you just have to consider pretty much on the top of your list. As soon as you have space, think about putting Pokepuff in your lists. On to Special Charge now. The item is pretty simple. It reads, shuffle 2 special energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. And I think, although it's simple, it's pretty insane. The wombo combo people will jump to is of course in Night March, because with puzzles and 1 special charge, you will pretty much never run out of resources now, so you can go pretty crazy with lots of acrobikes and go as aggressive as you like. Think about decks like Greninja, where they're trying to use Jirachi promos in the mix to try and pretty much put you down in resources and draw out the game as best as possible. Well, that's really like not an option now that you have Special Charge as the Night March player. It should be really easy for you to just overpower things. It could even mean that lists change. They go back to just a raw speed build with like 4 acrobike, just because you have so much recovery now that you can pretty much go all in from turn 1 and just hope to recover it all back. So just such a good option. There is more to this card than just Night March, of course. I mentioned STEELIX CLAWITZER, where you're playing just special energy, so recovering some of those could be pretty useful. Also, Mega Rayquaza, it's one of these decks that's very focused on double colorless, but even double dragon energy based decks, they pretty much get a breath of life from Special Charge. Giratina is probably going to see a lot less play thanks to Pokemon Ranger anyway, but it's more like Mega Latios and Mega Rayquaza which may benefit from a card like this, just to spam double dragons. And yeah, you did just hear me correctly. I did say Mega Latios. In a format where Froakie, Joltik, Pumpkaboo, Phantump, Combee, and Zorua, these are all like the most likely leads that you're going to see from a lot of decks. Why aren't more people playing Latios and taking the free wins? It's one I'm keeping on my radar, so look out, Worlds. Latios is coming. Greedy Die is the next card introduced in XY11. It has a very interesting mechanic as well, where its effect only occurs if it's revealed when taking a prize card. So if you do, you flip a coin. If heads, take another prize card. Now I'm sure many of you have seen the awesome Japanese advert where Umbreon EX is able to take 6 prizes thanks to Greedy Die, but personally I think the card won't see much play beyond that. I thought it would be fun to track down the stats on sort of prizing cards because it's useful info just in general when deck building, but it's also hugely important in this case, of course. So look in the description below if that's something that you're into. For those of you too lazy, I'll give you a short version. 64.34% of the time, you've chosen to play 4 dead cards in your deck because none of them are prized. And even when we do get these in the prize cards, we still need to flip to gain any advantage. Sometimes it's just, again, a null effect. Even these stats are misleading and probably make it even worse because Greedy Die could be the last card in your prize cards, so it has no effect. And with EXs so rife in the format, you could have 2 prize cards and one of them could be your Greedy Die. So again, flip or no flip, the effect is nullified because it's a prize that you take when you're already finishing the game. So even though you're taking 6 prizes where they could be in there 30-something% of the time, at the same time, you're not always getting the effect because of how you draw your prize cards. If we at some point down the line see a card similar to Azelf from an old set, this could like change our prize cards. We get to look at them and manipulate them. Then this card could actually become pretty bonkers, and games could basically turn into how many heads players are able to flip after taking a prize. So please, Pokemon, don't make the game flippier than it already is. Many thanks, Joe Bernard. P.S. Please make Foongus cool. Start sending your support tickets in now, boys and girls. We want Foongus and we don't want Azelf back because Greedy Die would be just ridiculous. On to the supporters now. We have Ninja Boy, one of the absolute faves from the set because it opens up many options for lots of decks at any point in the game, really. I've mentioned it a lot already in the video. Ninja Boy allows us to search the deck for a basic Pokemon and switch it with one of your benched Pokemon in play. Any cards attached, damage, and special conditions carry over to the new Pokemon, and then shuffle the first basic back into the deck. I can definitely see this being played in a bunch of decks. Think about how many decks use AZ just for freedom of movement. Well, Ninja Boy can also be that sort of pseudo-switching option, while at the same time we can gain benefits in lots of different cases. Think about Mega Evolutions when you need Spirit Links. You just turn 1, you attach something onto like a Hooper, let's say, because you're always starting with Hooper apparently. If you're playing a Mega deck, it just seems to be one of those things that always happens. You attach that tool, then you do a big Sycamore, and then next turn you just casually Ninja Boy into your new dude. Straight away you can Mega Evolve out of nowhere, so that's pretty awesome. Because the ruling on Ninja Boy is that if the original Pokemon had been in play for a turn, then the new Pokemon that can be evolved on the same turn. So you get the effects of the old card carrying over as well, so that's pretty awesome. There's also a cool combo with EXP Share and Regirock, which I've mentioned a couple of times. Basically, simply keep a Regirock on your bench all game with EXP Share. It can't be Lysandered up, they can't get rid of the tool, and basically you can just, even when you have free attachments just randomly, if you've already got a good board state but you just have an attachment for the turn, it may as well be onto something like this Regirock, and then at some point in the game you Ninja Boy into your main attacker and just do a big burst of damage late on in the game just to finish them off, really. So I can definitely see this working for more than just YVELTAL builds, but also like Max Elixir decks where you get that early game acceleration sometimes, but then you can sort of lack the late game presence. Well, Ninja Boy can really give you something like that, so that's pretty cool. Get your hands on Regirocks because it's been my main man for a while now, but he gets even more useful in the set, or just in the format with this guy. There's also the niche element of sort of surprise style Pokemon like Umbreon EX and Latios EX, which may see a lot more play in particular decks thanks to Ninja Boy, because it can just completely swing a game coming out of nowhere, because you can just even win on the first turn if you're playing Psychic Energy and Latios EX, just Ninja Boy and take the win straight then and there. So I think it's a really cool option because it's really difficult for players to play around as well. Players like myself now just be in constant fear when you're looking at your opponent play down the Ninja Boy and you just run through all the different combinations in your head that can just wreck you on that turn. Just weird, rogue, unplayable cards that could pop out and just ruin your day. It's just going to really make worlds of roller coaster. Whenever you see that Ninja Boy, your heart's going to start pounding like, oh my god, what tech is he playing that's going to wreck me here? And then you can breathe that sigh of relief when they just don't do anything crazy and it's a card that you should expect. But at the same time, this Ninja Boy can just really change the game. I think it's such a cool card. There's plenty of combos out there. I've really just hit the tip of the iceberg with this guy, I think, and there's plenty of combos for Ninja Boy. So, finally, we have Pokemon Ranger. It's another impactful supporter from the set, removing all effects of attacks on both players and all Pokemon. This is a pretty big deal for getting around some of the most powerful cards we currently have in Standard. We have means of getting around Quaking Punch, Chaos Wheel, Shadow Stitching, even the Evolutions, Jolteon and Glaceon. Clearly this is going to be a one-off supporter in a large portion of decks, and also it spells trouble for the recent archetype Aquabox because those cards that I just mentioned, Seismitoad, Glaceon, even Regice, these are all like really compromised by this card, so it could be the end of Toad, but think about stuff like Trevenant where there is Lysander, there is Hexmaniac, everyone's playing these cards already, but still plenty of decks struggle to deal with a constant Trevenant every turn, even if they do get the break of the lock once or twice. So carry on with Quaking Punch, I still think it's good enough, but many times just getting that one Pokemon Ranger could swing a game. Could get you into your counters, could get you, enough Night Marches in the discard pile just to win the game and just outpower them. So this one Pokemon Ranger does pretty much change the game for Seismitoad and all these other cards. Before Ranger was announced, I was getting pretty hyped about making a Ninja Boy deck with just Jolteon, Glaceon, Regice. I think a lot of people were thinking that. But with Ranger, that really does new to the deck and makes it unplayable. So that's pretty cool. So actually, that is everything. I hope you all enjoyed my set review. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'd also love to hear your opinions on the set. Is there a card I undersold? Did I miss a big Wombo combo? And let me know your favourite cards in the set as well. Start the discussion down below, and I'll do my best to get back to you in good time. In the meanwhile, it's been Joe here from OmniPoke, and I will see you guys next time.